Let's look at the history of epidemiology. Okay, here. So the history of epidemiology is actually going to be quite long. Why? Because we have picked a few personalities that contributed to the development of the discipline of epidemiology. So this description is not a linear one, or is not a steady one that this event led to that. What we are basically describing are the key milestones that have been achieved in epidemiology over the years, and the personalities involved and how they really contributed to these milestones. So initially, the understanding of what causes diseases was not really a scientific one. So people used a lot of guesswork to say, okay, diseases are caused because of, let us say, someone inhaling bad air, issues to do with the miasma theory or supernatural forces. This was the understanding, the early understanding about what diseases, how diseases actually happen. So Hippocrates is regarded as the father of Western medicine. He is the one who started challenging this belief that diseases are caused because of supernatural forces. And he brought in the element of the environment playing a key role in the occurrence of diseases. So he talked about airs, waters, and human behavior playing a key role in the occurrence of diseases. And that is still something that we even hold up to now, because we know some diseases are caused because of environmental factors or environmental exposures. So we move to another key person, James Grant, is regarded as the father of demography, and demography is the study of human populations. So he looked at population data and analyzed it and came up with data on mortalities, birth, and then and it presented this data, for example, in tabular forms. These are some of the things that we actually continue to apply even after today. We apply population data in planning, in planning for health services and other things, allocation of resources. But of course, during his time, these were not things that were actually done. Okay, so he invented this idea of taking data about people who die, birth registration, even marriage registration, basically what we now call as demographic data. Okay, and he used what we call now life tables to be able to estimate life expectancies at different ages. So that was his contribution. After today, we still use demographic data to come up with conclusions about risk factors, about health outcomes in different populations. So we move to another person who is actually also credited a lot in issues to do with data still, and for him, he used this data for health reasons or for medical reasons, and this is basically why he is being referred to as the founder of medical statistics and the pioneer in epidemiology. So for him, he did more analysis on this data about health, about deaths, and about birth and then disease patterns. Okay, so for him, he was not only interested in mortality data, he was interested in making more analysis on this data to inform public health interventions. So their roles are related. That is for John Grant and then William Farr. So we move to Edward Jenner. Is credited for developing the first vaccine. Okay, a vaccine, that is the smallpox vaccine. Of course, by then, knowledge about immunology, what we now know, issues to do with the immunization, how immunization boosts the immunity, the knowledge about that was not there. Okay, so Edward was actually known for designing or for actually pioneering the making of vaccines. And one of the key milestones in public health is immunizations. Okay, immunizations have reduced the number of mortality to a very huge extent. And immunization also, like for example, played a key role in controlling COVID-19. Okay, so that was his contribution. So this actually gave a good understanding of how other vaccines can be made. And as we talk now, we have several vaccines that are given to individuals. So we move to John Snow. John Snow is regarded as the father of modern epidemiology. You cannot talk about the history of epidemiology without mentioning John Snow. He was an English physician. His work mainly rotated around investigation of cholera outbreak in London. Still, we need to go back to the fact that during that time, issues to do with the germ theory, for example, which is about that diseases emerge, or diseases are caused by agents, whether bacteria or viruses. That knowledge was not there. The existence of a microscope was not. There was no microscope to really look at these microbes and say that, okay, when a person has this disease, we are able to deduce that when we looked at this specimen, the specimen had these microbes. This was not there. Okay, so when John Snow investigated the cholera epidemic in England, in London in particular, he was able to point to the fact that particular water pumps were actually associated with the mortalities that were happening because of cholera. Okay, so he did this by looking at the data on the people who were dying and then correlating that with the nature of water that they were using for drinking. Okay, so he came up with a map, okay, to show the distribution of the mortalities, where the mortalities were actually happening. And by that time, what is very key is that there were companies that were actually supplying water. Okay, so these companies, he believed that the water, one of the companies was actually supplying water that was contaminated. Okay, so that belief is what we now, of course, know as a hypothesis. A hypothesis is when you make a statement, which we often call an educated guess, that taking water from company A is associated with increase in the chances of dying from cholera. That is, for example, a hypothesis. So that is how he came up with the what we now know as the epidemiological methods, the way in which we carry out epidemiological investigations actually emanate from his work with investigating which company supplied water that was actually contaminated. And of course, this meant that for his work to be taken seriously and have application that is of importance in public health, he needed to convince the authorities that this is what is happening. Okay, of course, he had also opponents, people who were not really believing in what he was saying. Okay, so he had to play that role of convincing the authorities. The same thing that we have in public health. We need to talk to policymakers about things that we have found out, such that things can be changed, policies can be changed, or interventions can be put in place. For example, testing the water, ensuring that there is a quality assurance team to always test this water before it is given to the population. Okay, and of course that often, if you're going to tell companies to always to have their water tested first before they transfer this water for domestic use, that means there is an economic cost associated with that. So you need to convince the owners of this company to really understand that there is this need that needs to be addressed. Okay, so that is also what John Snow did. So eventually, with his methods, what we can term as epidemiological methods of having a hypothesis in place and then going and collecting this data and coming up with a map to basically prove his hypothesis, and eventually convincing the authorities that this is the point, this is the evidence for this, this is not what we need to do. And in one of the issues was that in the pump, which called the famously now called the Broad Street pump, where the handle was removed, that means people are no longer getting water from it, and then there was a decrease in the number of cholera cases around the area. That really also proves that indeed people who are getting water from there were getting the water from a contaminated point.